right. Okay, so this is our January 6th, 2022 Design Review Committee meeting. Up for review tonight are 95 Barnes and 2 Shawsheen. 1141 Bennington was supposed to present this month as well as last month. Apparently, they did not receive the scoping determination from BPDA that they were expecting to have by the end of 2021. So they said that they expect it soon, and they should have their response to that report, which is the DPIR, done late February or early March. And at that point, they'll be able to schedule another review with us. So it's looking like possibly March, maybe April for the next time that we'll look into that. But we do have 2 Shawsheen is another large project that's being reviewed by the BPDA. So we do have a large project that that came back pretty fast. But this evening, we are going to start with 95 Barnes. See if Richard's in here, or I'm not sure if Lorene was covering.
Hi, Tony. This is Derek Dolan. I'm here. Richard was supposed to be here as well. So maybe a few more minutes for him to come in.
Hi, Derek. Billy Hepp, I'm here too.
Hey, Billy. How's it going?
All right.
If you like, we could start with 2 Shawsheen.
Yeah, maybe that'd be a good idea. And I can I'll try and call Lorene and just see if Richard will be joining.
Sure, although I don't think I see. Are the folks from 2 Shawsheen here?
This is Tanya.
Yeah,
I'm
Tony,
here.
yes.
Okay.
Oh, good. Okay.
Here, I'll stop sharing my screen so you can go ahead and share.
Okay. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. I am Tanya Hanel. I'm here with the East Boston CDC. I'm joined tonight by our project architect and East Boston resident, Sharon, who is the owner of Joy Street Studios, Sharon Gentes. She'll also be a co-presenter with me on this project. And Matt Eckel is our representation from Drago and Toscano. He's with us tonight as well. Thank you for having us. My apologies, like many in East Boston, I am a little bit under the weather. It's not COVID, and I don't think you can catch it through Zoom, but you'll have to maybe live through a hoarse voice from me tonight. So Matt is putting our presentation up. There we go. And this is our second presentation. I apologize. I did not realize that this was the design committee. So this might be a little inaccurate. I thought it was the larger neighborhood council, but we'll revise this. Happy to be meeting with the design committee. That's actually Al Caldarelli calling me because I think he's having a little bit of trouble joining, but Al Caldarelli would also like to join. He's our executive director from the East Boston CDC. Let's see. So I think we can probably move forward in the presentation. Just let him know that we are on a little earlier than expected. So in his absence, I'll do a little bit of background on the East Boston CDC, who we are, and why this project is important to us. So we have been in East Boston, working here and working to keep East Boston affordable and advance and promote the livelihood of poor people in East Boston for 50 years now. We've had the opportunity to work in a number of beautiful buildings throughout East Boston to renovate them as housing for the community. A few of those are shown here on the screen. These are some projects. One is the Barnes School, senior housing in Eagle Hill. One is the Lewis Mall Apartments in Maverick Square. And then you also have the Chevrolet School, which is in Orient Heights, and people might be a little more familiar with that. That's also senior housing. And back when East Boston CDC was founded, you know, the triple decker stock was really our affordable family housing. So many of our families, low income and otherwise, were living in triple deckers throughout East Boston. It was overall not a tremendous need for affordable family housing. And so the CDC focused initially on economic development. We funded economic development loans to many small businesses in the neighborhood. And then we also focused on decent, safe, and affordable senior housing. So all of these buildings have elevators, single floor flats for seniors to live in, and they were very successful at the time. And I guess, you know, what I would note is that I don't think we have a picture of our most recent projects in here. But our most recent projects have been family housing. So the Greenway Apartments on Maverick Street and also Paris Village on Paris Street are both family housing. And the reason why we're proposing family housing for the site at 2 Shawsheen is that we have a 5-year wait list for our family housing. We have seen a tremendous increase in the rents in our family housing stock throughout East Boston, primarily in the triple deckers, which is why I mentioned that historically that's been our affordable housing. Many of us remember when you could find a 2-bedroom apartment for $1,200, no problem in East Boston, but that is not the case today, as average rents for 2 bedrooms are up near $3,000. So with that in mind, we're proposing a mixture of homeownership, affordable homeownership, and affordable family rental housing for this site. I'll give a little bit of the site context, and I see Gail in the chat. I'm sure she knows this site well. It is a pretty environmentally sensitive site and also a pretty sensitive site in terms of its location in the neighborhood. So we are really, as the very zoomed out view in the upper right shows the location of the site relative to the CVS and I think it's the former Excel Academy that used to be on the other side of the directly abutting the marsh. So our site does not directly abut the marsh, but there is marshland that comes in the back along the CVS site, which is part of the Belle Isle Marsh. We did have somebody go out and survey our site in order to make sure that we don't have any wetlands on our site. There is not, however, I will be the first to say that, you know, I'm always a little surprised when I go to this site, which is a oil distributor. And so therefore they are storing oil tanks on the site, just how close the proximity is to one of our treasured assets in East Boston, which is the Belle Isle Marsh. So we have been working carefully in concert with the BPDA's resiliency team to try to make sure that we are improving the site and the well-being of that buffer, that, you know, border of that small section of the Belle Isle Marsh that we see in the back right corner of the site. In terms of the neighborhood context, which is extremely important to our design considerations, you know, I'm going to be totally honest, we've struggled a little bit with this site. It's almost an acre. And on the one hand, it feels very commercial, and its use right now is very commercial. The sites and the buildings in front of us, as you'll see later, are are both commercial in nature. And obviously the large CVS parking lot to our right. Just to the left is a beautiful neighborhood that you all live in on Barnes Avenue. Mostly, 2 and 3 family homes with some single families. And so the way that we've been approaching the site has transitioned a little bit from initially thinking about it as, one large building, one large multifamily building, which we originally envisioned as a large rental building. It's transitioned into 2 separate buildings, one homeownership, one rental, which really act as a bookend to the neighborhood, the residential neighborhood, and a little bit of a transition between and a buffer between the residential neighborhood and the more commercial neighborhood on the other side of the site. So this is the neighborhood context I was referencing. We're just going to go through a quick few slides for folks who are a little less familiar with the context. So that is a law office, and there's actually a variety of neighborhood businesses in this gray building on the left. We're going to get into the site plan a little bit, but this is the Shawsheen Road. Our address is 2 Shawsheen Road. You'll see to the right of the page, Shawsheen Road, where it intersects with Saratoga and heads towards the beach, is a public way, a public street, quite wide. To the left, what looks like a driveway is actually a 40-foot private way. That's the Shawsheen Road extension. And so right now that has not really been used as a road per se, but we'll get into that a little bit more based on our conversations that we had from our last meeting. This is just looking straight on the site as you head down Saratoga Street. There's multifamily houses to the left, and then right in front of our site, blocking access from Saratoga Street proper, is the low 1-story gray building, the commercial building, and the Domino's and a beer and wine shop. As you head into Winthrop, it becomes much more commercial along this strip of Saratoga Street, starting with the CVS and the CVS parking lot. And then, this looks like it's taken totally out of context, but it's actually just the other side of our site. These are our abutters on Barnes Avenue, beautiful homes, quiet street, family housing. And this is our site as it stands now. This view is taken from a portion of the Shawsheen Road extension that heads towards the MBTA, which has a gate along that portion, and it's a little bit significant in that it's a future potential pathway for what I believe many are hoping is a bike path extension for the Greenway. So this portion of our site we also don't want to ignore, and is very important as well. And you'll see that there are some trees along here. We do want to attempt, however we can, we're going to need some access to the site for parking, off-street parking, but we do recognize that this is a nice landscaped green buffer that we want to make sure that our site helps to build on. On the other side of this very small strip of green, I'm not sure if we have it in the next slide, but it is essentially unpaved and for lack of better words, it is not the cleanest of sites. So this is where trucking happens. This is where the oil tanks are stored. So this is a very commercial site with commercial activity, and we're looking to add a lot of green here. So I think this is just the overall, so you can see really the change in character between the Barnes Avenue and the CVS. And so you do see there where that strip of green to the back is the continuation of the Belle Isle Marsh. There is some signage at the back of the CVS site. So we sort of have everything, right? We have a little bit of marsh, we have commercial, and then we have single and 2 family houses. And what we have also is nearly an acre site, which is a rare opportunity in East Boston to bring some much needed affordable housing. So for those who joined us previously, back in November, our original proposal was to create 58 mixed income transit oriented homes, 22 homeownership, 36 rental, and we had 19 parking spaces. Our current proposal is to create 57. So we've lost one unit. We still have the 22 homeownership units, 10 2-bedrooms and 12 3-bedrooms. We really see the need for more 3-bedrooms. So we did increase the number of 3-bedroom homeownership units. We also have, we've decreased one rental unit, and I believe we might have maybe one or two more 1-bedroom units. Essentially that massing of that building got a little bit smaller in order to accommodate some more parking on the site. And so the big change really in this proposal that we want to talk to you about tonight is both the increase in the parking, adding 17 spaces to get to 36 parking spaces, as well as some changes to the site plan to improve the Shawshene extension, the private way. And then I am just going to talk a little bit. I won't belabor this point, but I want to make sure that everybody knows who we house in this housing. We are not public housing. We do get subsidy from the city and the state. It is mostly for construction. So the rents that we have in our units, the majority of those families are not on rental subsidies. They are paying rent every month, and they are working. They're the working poor and the working middle class. We have a lot of, in our family housing at Greenway and Paris Village, we have a lot of single moms. We have a lot of 2-parent households who are both working full-time with 2 or 3 kids. And believe it or not, the way that wages are going, they qualify for our 60% AMI units. 72,000 is very much the working poor in Boston with the cost of living here. Our homeownership units are geared to a little bit higher income. And so I went ahead and put in, the incomes for 80% AMI and 100% AMI. Again, finding an affordable 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom condominium in East Boston right now to buy, if you are earning between 95 and 120,000, quite honestly, some of us might think that's a lot of money to be earning. There is very little that's on the market right now for under 400,000 for a 3-bedroom condo. So creating some more opportunities for families to purchase and stay in East Boston is also an important aspect of this project. So with that, I will turn it over to Sharon, who's going to lead us through some of our guiding design principles for the project.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. In the next couple slides, we're going to see some design principles. We have changed the design of the buildings, but I think some of the design principles and the general feel are going to be very similar. So the first one is to prioritize open space. With the proximity to the marsh and with all of the families, we really think that green space is very important on this site. And the next slide is bay windows, cornices. So the idea here is that we're going to try to break these buildings down to have a smaller scale with things like bay windows and cornices and changes in material so that it doesn't look as much like a very large building, but it relates more to the smaller scale residential buildings that are around them. The next one. So building for the 21st century, thinking about sustainability and climate change, obviously in East Boston, we're right at the sort of crux of some of these issues, and this site is definitely no different. Half of the site is in the flood zone. And then the upper half is out of the flood zone. We're designing this site to be able to accept those flood waters without damage to the buildings or the residents. We're also looking at doing mitigation through wetlands and other plantings around the site that will help to manage the water. And so the first floors of both buildings, the first occupied floors of both buildings will be above the projected 70-year flood projections. So we're not just looking at where the floodplain is now, but we're looking at where it's anticipated to be 70 years from now. So making sure that these buildings are made to last as things change. Also, we're looking to be as sustainable as possible. So using LEED or passive house standards to have a really well insulated building envelope, high efficiency mechanical systems and water saving devices so that the buildings can operate with as little impact on the environment as possible. The next one, so this is the site plan. This is different from what we looked at last time we were here in a number of ways. So at the top of the page, that's the condo, the home ownership building. That's the one that's right up against the MBTA site. That has parking on the lower level and then living space above. The parking is the part of the site that is in the flood zone. And so if a flood comes, the parking area would be able to have water come in and then the water would be able to leave. And all the living spaces and mechanical spaces would be up above that. Right down the center, aligned with Barnes Ave, is green space. There's also green space when you see the rendered site plan all the way around, but that space would be a place where residents could gather. We're looking at putting a tot light there. We might be considering even putting in a bike path as part of the greenway extension that's being planned. And then you can see in orange the rental building. The big change from our last presentation is that we are looking to put a drive lane through that private way. So you can see that we're only building on one half of the private way, a 20 drive lane, and then on our site, the 17 or 14 parking spaces. That's right, there's some in both buildings, 14 parking spaces for the rental units. And the benefit of this is, there's a couple benefits other than the fact that we're just adding more parking in general. But now with that drive lane, those cars do not need to cut through Barnes Avenue to go to Saratoga Street. Those cars would be able to use that drive lane to go out to the light at Shawsheen. And so we have more ways to accommodate cars, but the impact of those cars should be less on the neighboring houses and the neighboring street. Next slide. Yes, so here's the rendered site plan, and you can see that at the top of the page, that's sort of the marshiest area. We're looking at putting a lot of green there. The central area is a green space. We're showing a tot lot so that it's really, as Tanya said, it's kind of bookending the neighborhood with something that is residential and green. And then the parking spaces have changed. The other thing we're showing here is the bicycle parking. So making sure that there is a bicycle parking space for every resident.
And Sharon, just before you move on, if you want to go back to the site plan, and Matt, feel free to chime in here, but I see there's a question about using the private way, which is important. So the parking spaces themselves, I believe, are actually a part of our lot. The portion of the private way that we're utilizing and improving as a road, or as an access road really, is only 20 feet wide. And that is only half of the private way. So my understanding is that, we are only entitled to improve the portion of the private way that abuts our property. And so that's what we're proposing here.
That's right. And Tanya, as you said, the parking spaces are on the property. They're not on the private way. So everything on the private way would be road that could be accessed.
Yeah.
So these are the floor plans. You can see here that We really are, as Tanya said, emphasizing both 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom units. Those are the green and the blue units. And then we also have a collection of some 1-bedroom units as well. The next page shows the 3rd floor. And then one thing you'll see is on the 4th floor, we're pulling it back so that the part of the building that is closest to the neighborhood and the residential portion of the neighborhood is 3 stories. And then we pull back the 4th floor so that it's closer to the CVS. And that is it. I think the other thing that I didn't mention, but that we're exploring here is the possibility of multiple entrances to the buildings. So rather than just having a tall building with a very large lobby that everyone comes and goes through, some of the units might have entrances directly into those units. So it would break down the scale of the building and have more people sort of entering and exiting along those sidewalks. So you can see where we have some arrows going in. And I think that's.
Yep, that's our presentation, short and sweet. I think we have a lot of expertise in the attendance tonight, so wanted to leave plenty of time for feedback and suggestions.
We have one additional question that came up in the chat from Gail asking about a crosswalk light. I imagine that would be at Saratoga Street, but feel free to clarify, Gail, if you like.
I don't know, someone posed that to me. I'm not sure what light they were talking about on Shawsheen. There isn't a light at Shawsheen.
Yeah, there's nothing right now. If what they were suggesting is a crosswalk light, that would be different than a traffic light per se.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not
Gail.
sure if that section sees a lot of pedestrian activity, but I imagine it is difficult to cross Saratoga Street as a pedestrian there.
Hi, everyone. This is Liz Bagley. Sorry, I think I sent that to you direct, Gail, and I apologize. But in the presentation, I don't think, not from you, Tanya, but I'm sorry, I already forget the woman after, but she said the light at Shawsheen, and I wasn't sure if it was the crosswalk, because I live right there, and there's no light
Yeah, I may
there.
have misspoken.
Okay, Joy. So, it says Joy Street. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm all thrown
I'm
off there.
Sharon.
So Sharon, because originally, and I had spoken with both Matt and Jeff about this, that wasn't going to be an egress on that small private way from. So is that what you're saying? That private way, Shawsheen, and they'll be turning left and right near the Domino's and everything to get onto Saratoga Street?
Yeah, that's a revised portion of our proposal tonight.
That's a big revision.
Yeah, it is. It is a big
Huge.
revision. One of the things that we really heard a lot about in our first meeting with the neighborhood was about access and egress from the site and not wanting to overburden Barnes Avenue with all of that. And so we do, and we said we have access to a private way. We are able to improve it. It wasn't something we were certain people would want us to do, but it can provide another route and just a little bit of and ease the burden on Barnes Avenue. So that's what we proposed here. It did also allow us, quite frankly, to solve one of the other major concerns, which was the low parking ratio. So we nearly doubled the parking by having those 19 spaces off of the private way.
Okay, and by big revision, I mean big bad, because I'm pretty sure everybody on this call knows how busy Saratoga Street is already coming and going, from Winthrop heading towards, in and out of the city, in and out of East Boston. So this is a sort of major revision for the people that live on this side, the abutters on the other side of Saratoga.
The abutters on the other side of Saratoga.
I'm on St. Andrew, the corner of Shawsheen and St. Andrew.
Okay.
And so, but you know what I'm talking about, Saratoga, you know, where you were showing that goes into Winthrop that passes CVS, and
Mhm.
do you know how backed up that road is?
Oh,
every
yeah,
day?
we do, yes.
So we're
Yes.
looking to get like 60 cars, but say 40 in and out of there you know, to hit on an additional.
Yeah, I mean, Saratoga Street is a busy thoroughfare, and it handles a lot of traffic, you know, primarily from Winthrop and Winthrop development. I don't think we're gonna be able to avoid, you know, people using it, or adding cars, you know, to it. That's a fact of life. I think what we were trying to do, and maybe this is the wrong direction, was redirect some of the traffic from our two buildings out to Saratoga Street without having to go on Barnes Avenue.
No, I know what you're trying to do. Okay.
What I'd like
Wow.
to say, as a resident of Barnes Avenue, although I'm still not completely in favor of the project as it is, the addition of the drive lane on the private way is an improvement. Now, whether the traffic from the site leaves the site through the private way onto Saratoga or through St. Edward Street onto Saratoga, it's still going to end up on Saratoga. It's still going to back up. You're not going to eliminate that. It's just where it goes onto Saratoga Street.
Yeah.
So I mean, yes, Saratoga Street backs up into Winthrop. I see it when I go out walking in the morning, but I think it's immaterial whether it ends up at Shawsheen or St. Edwards going onto Saratoga. You're not going to eliminate that. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I think that the fact that you have added 14 spaces is good. I would like to have seen more than that. And the fact that you've added the drive lane in the private way is good. But I think the plan still needs to have a few more tweaks before I would be able to say I could be in favor of it. I'm against a fourth floor. I think it's too hard. The neighborhood, there's nothing in the neighborhood that's that tall. There's no houses on all of Saratoga or Barnes Ave that are that tall. There are still going to be people parking on Barnes Ave that live in the condos or in the rental space. They may be low income, but they haven't taken a vow of poverty when they buy the condos. And I've had subsidized housing units next to me in developments I've lived in before, and they've been a husband and wife, and they've both had cars. So what do you do when you have a situation like that where they buy a condo and they both have cars? They don't have to be fancy new cars. They could both be beaters, but they both have cars. They both have to go to work, and they have maybe one parking space. They've got to park someplace else. If you have 22 units and say 18 of them have two cars, there's 36 cars right there. There's only 22 parking spaces. Where do they go? They go onto Barnes Ave. They can't all go in the existing parking spaces. And with the 35 rentals, there is going to be some number of those that have cars. Where are all these cars going to go? Are they going to go on Saratoga? Are they going to go on Barnes Ave? Saratoga doesn't have the ability to absorb that many more cars. Barnes Ave doesn't have the ability to absorb them. When they have visitors, they're going to have visitors. Just because they're low income doesn't mean they don't have visitors, doesn't mean that their visitors don't have cars. Where are these people going to park? That's still a huge concern. You need to have more space for parking. The neighborhood as it exists just cannot support that many more cars.
All right, we hear you. We will keep hammering away. We're in discussions with the BPDA right now. There's, just to be totally honest, because we hear it from the neighborhood and we get it. We live here also. The fact that this site is a stone's throw from an MBTA station, and the fact that it is affordable housing. And so we have not traditionally developed a 1-for-1 parking ratio for our other buildings, even our family housing. You know, that is making it challenging to push for more parking here. But again, we hear you. The condos, I think we certainly agree, need to have a 1-for-1 parking ratio. So we hear you.
Yeah, I mean, in the condo building that I live in, we have 1-to-1 on 3 of the units, and one of the units has 2 spaces. So there's 5 spaces for 4 units. Now, granted, these aren't low income or mixed income. They're, the going rate. But as a rule, you buy a condo and you expect a parking space. I mean, whether it's low income or not, that's kind of a given. When you have a family, a husband and a wife, or two working members and children, there's got to be one car anyway. So how can you not expect a family to not have a car? It's very, very rare that there's not a car. So to have 22 units and not have 22 parking spaces in there, that's a problem. That's a big problem. And by having the opening, by having Barnes Ave become open to the condos and the rentals, we're also losing parking spaces for people that live on Barnes Ave that park down in that dead end. Any given day, you can go down there, there's 3, 4, maybe 5 cars parked down there, which won't now be able to park there. So we're actually losing parking spaces for the residents of Barnes Ave.
We have some more questions that came up in the chat. There's one from Gail asking about where is the public safety concern for this area given emergency vehicles? By private way, there is, I believe, a problem for BTD approving access there. Needs to be reviewed before we are saying with certainty Shawsheen is going to be an acceptable egress. There is an entrance into the site to the right of Domino's now. And that seems to be the only acceptable consideration. I do remember from the last presentation, there was somebody from that building where Domino's is, and I think they were they wanted to discuss the use of that side to get to the back of the site.
Yeah, they currently use it as parking. So so it isn't really as it is usable as a ingress and egress. There's also a grade issue. So bringing, the parking in on that side would probably eliminate all of the green space in the middle of the site. We would have to be using that for a drive lane.
And I think there was a width problem as well, that it just wasn't wide enough to get two-way traffic. So you'd have to come in and then you'd have to go around and you'd still have to come out on Barnes Ave. So did study that, and it really was not a feasible option.
Is there any concern for emergency vehicles getting in through the Shawsheen extension?
Go ahead, Matt.
Sorry, Tony. Yeah, so the reason we went with 20 feet wide is that's what's required. So this actually helps emergency vehicles. Now they have a way to come in from 2 different areas, as opposed to just the one down Barnes Ave, which if there is any street parking can get congested. So this actually opens up and allows for better not only vehicular access for residents, but also for emergency vehicles to access it. So that's where the 20 feet comes from. Not only is that half of the private way, but that's what's required as an access point for emergency vehicles.
It's certainly worth mentioning that as part of the BPDA review process, there will be traffic studies performed. There will be all sorts of ways that we're evaluating the impact. So there will be more information on that as we go forward.
Right, that's a good point, Sharon. As you mentioned at the top, Tony, this is Article 80 large project right now, so there will be a lot of further studies, a project notification form that's actually filed, an LOI with the BPDA. So obviously this is still very early in the process, and there are some more of those kind of specific studies and documents coming down the pipeline. We're obviously here just getting general feedback, but to my original point, it does provide better access, but that'll be flushed out even further with traffic counts and things in a transportation study down the road.
We have another question related to traffic/parking. Liz asked, will there be a traffic light at Shawsheen and Saratoga now? Will the residents be given resident permit stickers?
I don't think, we're not proposing adding any traffic lights or any traffic signals. Again, that would have to, I assume, come from BTD, as part of the review. Whether or not it would actually be a help or whether it would actually hurt traffic in that area. And in terms of resident parking stickers, yes, every new development in East Boston, if you live in East Boston, you get a resident sticker. So much like me, who lives in a triple decker that has no driveway, and I can get a resident sticker, these folks would also be able to get a resident sticker.
We have a comment from Donna just stating East Boston has been screaming for some true affordable, and here we have it. Let's see. Larry
Donna.
Monaco.
I did just want to address, someone at our previous meeting very kindly asked the question of sort of, hey, I like your project. It's a little dense for me. What is the density that you guys could do here? If, in terms of what kind of a reduction could you sustain? And it was phrased very kindly. And I just want to talk about that again, because there's someone who's asked about eliminating the 4th floor. And we didn't really talk about or get into too much about the various design iterations we went through on this project with this site. But we did at one point have an all 3-story building on the site. And as I mentioned previously, it did eliminate most of the green space on the site to try to stay at 3 stories. And in terms of, and why that is in terms of the density, we are not a private developer who maxing out the density on the site necessarily, every unit doesn't put dollars in our pocket. That being said, we are trying to strike a balance with what will be eligible for funding and what will be considered as competitive for funding. So as you probably know, it's incredibly difficult to build, long-term restricted affordable housing in the state of Massachusetts. It's competitive for funding, and it takes a lot of funding to do something like this. So reducing the 4th floor off of the condo building would take us down to 18 units. I can tell you that going below 20, we will not qualify for any of the state funding for homeownership. So that would probably be a non-starter for us. I really hope that we do keep this. I hope people agree that 2 separate buildings and 2 separate massings is better, and that the green space is an improvement. We've tried to keep, as Sharon mentioned, the 4th story on the commercial side so that when you're actually looking at the project from Barnes Avenue and from the neighborhood, you don't see it. Quite frankly, I've noticed a lot of the setbacks in my neighborhood. I really don't see that 4th or 5th story. So it does appear and present itself as 2 3-story buildings from the neighborhood side. On the rental side, to reduce the 4th floor would take us down from 35 to 28 units, I believe. I think 28 units. And again, 35 is actually sort of one of the smaller projects that the state would consider for a rental housing development. So my fear is that if we reduce the massing, what will end up happening is we get more 1-bedroom units. And that is what happens quite often in affordable housing, is that, we get pushback and we have to make the building smaller, and we try to still qualify for state funding. And that's how we get a lot of 1-bedroom units. And we really want to try to continue to serve families here. So just my honest answer to that question.
Thank you for that. I tried to take very complete notes of everything throughout this, so that folks can see the design changes from the prior meeting to today.
I don't think we ever showed anyone the massive 3-story building. I think we didn't like it. So I think that happened before we ever met with you guys.
I just meant like in general, the differences between them. But yeah, I did note that it wouldn't be feasible as a 3-story. Liliana Isaac Snyder had asked, because she joined a little bit late, and was wondering if you could switch to a slide that has a different view of the project that shows Saratoga Street.
It's a great question. I don't know that we've rendered anything from that angle. Sharon, that would have.
What about, there's a context plan.
What's that?
There was a context plan earlier on that showed the marsh and Saratoga Street and the CVS.
Do you want to just flip through, Matt, and see if anything, Liliana, I don't know if you were looking for a rendering. I don't think we have a rendering from that perspective.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking about.
Right, we
Right, but
just have.
we don't
the-
have a rendering with the proposed building, no. Not
No.
for-
Yeah, what I can say is topographically, this doesn't really show the grade change very well, but we're almost, correct me if I'm wrong, Sharon, but I think we're almost, like 10 feet lower from the back of the site where the marsh is to the front of the site where the commercial development is.
Yeah.
So, a rendering from that side would be interesting.
If I could ask a question, when you propose to do the, use the 20 feet of the private way, how, if at all, will the fact that they're proposing to put another development in on the other side of the Shawshene private way, how will that impact you and your development, if at all? And are you aware of that development?
We're aware of it, although we haven't really been in other than just knowing that it's proposed, we don't have much else to do with it, but my understanding is they're on the other side of the private way. And so I think what would remain intact as is the 20 feet of the private way directly across from us. So I don't, they may be proposing some improvements to the upper portion of the private way, which again, if we're using that and we're keeping it clear of snow for our residents to use for ingress and egress, then that's great that there'd be improvements, sort of to the upper portion of the private way. But other than that, I don't think it impacts us.
Okay, I was just curious whether it would have any impact at all. I don't know what their plans are as far as improvements or whatever to the private way, or whether they have any.
Well, they're also proposing a very large building, which
Yeah,
is
yeah. Well, that's,
not appreciated in the neighborhood.
no, they're before the Board of Appeals again on the, I think it's the 17th.
I can speak to that if there's some desire to hear some information regarding the private way. I'm happy to provide color of that. And of course, I disagree with Gail that it's a large building. It's actually relatively small compared to everything else in the neighborhood. So, but if you want me to answer some questions, Tony, about the private way, I'm happy to do that.
Sure, that'd be excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for those that remember, this is Richard Lins, by the way. I represent the developer at 70 Shawshene, and we did have a robust community process regarding that project. And our intention is to improve the private way to our boundary. We had no plans to do anything further towards Barnes Ave, since we don't have really any frontage on that portion of it. So our improvements would essentially be the limit of the private way that goes to the rightmost portion of our property. I did have a conversation with Sal Colombo at CDC. And again, I think what Tanya had said is they're aware of our project, but really haven't had any specific dialogue regarding, what would happen with the private way. And again, our position is that, we're happy to work with anybody on that issue. But our plan, assuming, no other developments happen, is to improve the private way to that portion of our property.
Thank you for the explanation. It's always nice to have someone on the call who has details about something they weren't expecting to share. Gail had asked, we need to satisfy the wetlands issue, whether it has been filled, the site has utilized the right of Domino's for the oil company's use. Has proponent researched this with BTD?
I'm not totally sure I understand the question. I do know that we have to go before Concom, Gail, and so there'll be a full discussion of our treatment of that edge of the site and the fact that we border the site, and are we improving its relationship to the marsh. But happy to talk offline about, sort of the current use and how that was allowed. But I'm not entirely sure that that will matter for us because we're proposing such a vastly different use and a total redevelopment.
Yeah, I've been told with folklore that area with pretty much the gravelly look probably was all filled. So it was probably wetlands. So, but some historic maps would help.
Yeah, we'll definitely look into that.
And it may be worth noting that the CDC is working with a landscape architect as well on this, who understands about wetlands and restorations. And even though the landscape plan shows sort of generic lawn and trees, I think the intent is to rebuild with things that would be with plants and planting systems that would be appropriate to the surrounding area. So that's definitely something that's on our radar and that we're looking forward to incorporating as we go forward.
Well, I think I'm more concerned with the historic use there than I am with the landscape plan. I just think if that was filled an entire filled lot there, I think that could cause some issues. So just
Yep, it would cause issues for us and certainly for Concom as well. So something we'll look into.
We have a question from Mike Russo asking, what other facade materials / treatments were considered before you decided on what's been presented?
Honestly, we haven't even specifically decided. I think, it's just a sort of general intent, which is to use materials that are appropriate to a residential neighborhood and to keep it sort of residential in its feeling. But we're very early in the design process, and there's still a lot of visioning and imagining and sketching left to happen.
Matt, will you go back to maybe one of the rendering slides that shows a little bit more of, yeah. So I think we wanted to bring in, some of the brick and, some of the articulation of some bay windows. I also think this probably doesn't show it as well, but we're focusing on making the site pedestrian friendly. The majority of the site at 3 stories, it does sort of feel like, a triple decker scale. And so we're adding pathways and hopefully some direct access into some of the rental building units, I think off the parking, right? On the private way. Yeah. So, and all of that is meant to encourage more of a pedestrian scale to the site and bring our site to the neighborhood scale and bring the neighborhood into the site. That's part of why we're proposing and hoping to be able to include a tot lot on the site, one that would be open to the neighborhood as well to use.
We have a comment from Liliana saying, I'm a Barnes Ave resident. In my opinion, this project is too big and the traffic jams are going to be an issue. So that's been brought up several times. So we've noted that.
Tony, may I very briefly respond to the design team?
Please, Mike, please.
Yeah. So clearly I understand this is, we're not building the Paris Opera House here. I totally get it. I understand this is a below AMI project. I don't think you need to build in travertine or limestone or anything like that, but just sort of recognizing my personal interest in elevating design in our community, I would really challenge the design team to take a close look at what's being done with workforce housing in places like the Netherlands and across Scandinavia and also in Japan. Right now, just looking at this, it's literally a compendium of the very worst types of design gestures that we find in local vernacular architecture, dumbed down to just flat surfaces. And again, I'm not looking for a Paul Rudolph building or a Zaha Hadid building or something like that. But just clapboards with a couple of brick masses and some bump outs and call it a day. I get it. You're not trying to build a luxury building. And I do appreciate the gesture at a cornice, but it just seems so one-dimensional.
Right. Well, and
I'm assuming that the green areas on the facade are probably going to be hardy plank.
they are, yeah.
Yeah.
And I have
Real
to say, I
shingles.
agree with
Please,
you
real shingles.
that it's, oh, sorry.
Real shingles. Please. Real wood.
But the hardy siding comes with a 15-year paint warranty.
Right.
So, no,
think,
I agree.
Mike,
And I
I-
think it's meant to be at this stage still a little bit generic, just because we haven't studied in great detail. So I appreciate your enthusiasm for, you know, pushing the envelope with the design, and we'll continue to look into that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
We have one additional question here, asking, have you contacted the city of Boston on water/sewer upgrades due to when the casket company burned down and the fire department did not have enough water pressure for the fire? Will all of the roads area have to be open up to do this?
So we will have to look into this further when we file formally with the city. We haven't filed anything formal yet, and it will be a part, their review will be part of our Article 80 process. We do have, a civil plan or a site survey that shows the utilities and where they come into the site from the street. I apologize because I don't know right now off the top of my head where they come in, but this is something that we will have to look into, and the city will be very involved in making sure that we have the right pressure. We will have a full fire suppression system. The buildings will be fully sprinklered. So.
Okay, we have one comment from John Bertulli that says your slide states, but I'm not sure if he missed a comment there or had copied something and it didn't populate. But John, if you feel free to unmute or add something to the chat if you have a comment here or a question. Liliana asked, also showing green spaces as if you were giving us some kind of environmental benefit while building 60+ units is an insult to our understanding of your project. It's 57 units.
Yep.
As it is now.
It is. Yeah, I think all we're trying to say is we are going to be pushing the envelope with sustainability features of the development. And I think from my perspective, at least, I do hope others consider this an improvement to the environment of that particular site, which currently, I don't think anyone would argue is doing great things environmentally for that area.
John had shared the AMI qualifications for the home ownership and the rentals, but I'm not sure what the question is there. Did the qualification, the AMI for the families change at all between the previous?
No, it didn't. I don't know, Matt, if you want to go back to that slide, maybe people want to look at it. I mean, they will probably change between now and when the project is hopefully built, as these do change annually, but this is the benchmarks where they are now.
Okay, we're at 7 o'clock now. We have one more comment. We have two more comments, sorry. Let's see, Gail said this project, like all others, should embrace geothermal to abandon fossil fuels in light of our dire concern for the environment. And Donna said, there was a hotel proposed before this one. I think this proposal is better. It doesn't look like we have additional questions or comments getting in. And since we've been talking about this proposal for an hour, I figured we would wrap up and move on to our next one, if that's okay with folks. And I can organize all the notes that I took, and I can provide them to you, Tanya, Matt, and Sharon, just so you have a record of the questions that were asked and the responses and everything.
That would be great.
Right.
Thank you all. I know that this is everyone's Thursday evening, so honest thanks from us for your feedback. We will take it with us. Have a good
Feel
night.
better, Tanya.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
All right. So next up is 95 Barnes.
Tony, am I able to
And
share my
no, we-
screen?
Yep, you should be able to.
Great, thanks. Able to see that?
Yep.
Great. Ready when you are.
Sure, you can go right ahead.
Great, thanks, Tony. Good evening, everyone. My name is Richard Lenz. I represent Derek and Chelsea Dolan, who are the owners of 95 Barnes Avenue. This is an updated presentation for that project. I believe my colleague Lorene Scatino had presented this at a prior design review meeting. I'd like to let Derek say a few words just to introduce himself for those of you who don't know him in the neighborhood. But Derek, why don't you go ahead and say hello and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the project.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Richard. And hi, everybody. My name is Derek Dolan. And thanks again for listening to our proposal and providing feedback on our project. As a refresher for those who were at the last meeting, my wife Chelsea and I are looking to do a renovation of the third floor of our building, which is a two-family building, currently 2 stories, and we're living on the second story. As many of you know, there's a shortage of homes in our area that can comfortably, fit a growing family. So our main goals for renovating the third floor are really just we want to add an extra bathroom. We want to add a laundry room. Currently, our laundry room is actually in the basement. We don't have laundry in unit. And then while we can, since we have the space, we're looking to add another bedroom up there so that we don't outgrow our unit too quickly. And that could happen sooner than expected. Actually, Chelsea and I are, good news, we're expecting our first child in June. So I'm really on the hook for getting the laundry in the unit pretty quickly here. But the third floor currently, actually, we already pay taxes partially on the space up there. It's recognized as a partially finished attic, but the problem is with the existing square footage is that the ceiling heights are below 7 feet. And so it's really not comfortable living space. And actually the roof is pitched, so it goes down all the way to, 2 to 3 feet on the edges. So I believe if you Google it, the recommended ceiling height's about 9 feet. So our goal is to just really make that space actually livable by dormering out the roof to, create those ceiling heights of 9 feet. And then the other thing that we want to do is we do want to add a roof deck as well, just as a private space for my wife and I to enjoy. I personally have always really wanted a roof deck, and with the dormers, we'd actually be able to have one. And we think it would give us some nice views of the Belle Isle Marsh. I don't think it would, impede on any other neighbors' views. And with the existing zoning code, actually, even with the roof deck, we'd actually still be below the maximum height for our building. So that's not an issue there, but a roof deck you do need approval for. And again, this is a 2-family building. My wife and I, we live on the second floor. We intend to keep it a 2-family building. And so that's really why we wanted to make the third floor just part of the second unit where we live. So appreciate everybody, listening to our proposal again and providing feedback, and looking forward to hearing the comments. Rich, I'll turn it back over to you to go through the rest of what you wanted to speak about.
Thanks, Derek, and congratulations to you and Chelsea. Best of luck with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, just quick overview for everyone, just to get a little context for the neighborhood. We're looking at This intersection here, closest intersection is St. Edward and Barnes Avenue. The building we're looking at is the red 2.5-story with front and rear dormer already existing on the property. And just taking a look around at the general context, along St. Edward, of course, you have multiple triple deckers which sit higher than the current property, the property that we're currently talking about. The character pretty much throughout the rest of Barnes Ave is very similar to what we have here at 95 Barnes Ave. Bird's eye view, just to get an idea of the relationship of our building to the other buildings in the immediate vicinity. Some relatively decent setbacks from our property neighbor to the left, as well as the back of the triple deckers on the right. And it's a different view here in the intersection at St. Edward and Barnes. Our zoning abstract showing a lot of 6,250 square feet, 2 structures on the lot presently, the existing building, as well as the shed or rearmost property to the back property line. This is identified as a 2F4000 district that allows a 2-family as a matter of right, as well as a minimum of 4,000 square feet of land. We do meet those requirements. So this is a conforming use. We are not proposing to change anything with respect to the existing use, and therefore this would continue as a 2-family dwelling, continue to be a conforming use, and for all intents and purposes, a conforming structure. Just a street view looking head on at the building. And as I mentioned in my earlier comments, there are already existing dormers at the upper level. So space has already pretty much been established in the attic level. You can see here that the air conditioning unit, providing some climate comfort to the upper level is already in existing condition. Again, looking around the context of the neighborhood, looking down Barnes Ave towards Shawsheen, and then looking back up towards St. Edwards. And this is actually a good perspective to stop on for a moment. You can see here the height of our triple deckers that adjoin our property to our right side, actually sit higher than our property. These probably sit at about 37.5 feet because I do see that they do have exposed foundations, actually pretty generous exposed foundations. So these are relatively taller triple deckers for the area. So just a context view with some renderings that we've included with the updates based upon the comments that we heard at the last meeting and showing the site, and then showing what the proposed left side dormer would look like. I believe we were asked to consider removing the design element, which included sort of a paneled feature, a panel type finish. We've captured some of the siding and shingles that you typically see on the rest of the building and carry that up to give the character of this a much more consistent look. We've added the windows here just to show and illustrate what windows may look like, but I do want to caution everyone that the BPDA design review process is likely to make modifications to this based upon the alignment of windows below it. We're just actually including the windows so you can see that there will be windows on the dormer as well. You can also see the roof deck. There will be no head house accessing the roof deck. It would be by either hatch or spiral staircase only. So this would be the limit of the height of the building here, which is consistent with the height that it's already at for the existing dormers. Looking at the right side of the building, we added a context photo as well, very similar to what you see on the left-hand side, carrying that shingle up to the dormer as well, adding this cornice line and of course the roof deck. And we're showing these, and I just want to repeat that we are showing these as illustrations. Any modification to the exterior of the building that modifies a roof line is required to be reviewed by the Boston Planning and Development Agency. So the colors that you see here for the railing system, for example, may be different. They may be a darker color, for example. I know that that's a preference for the BPDA, but we're actually just showing this to illustrate what the connection of the roof deck would be to the remainder of the building. So existing plot plan, and we are not changing anything with respect to the footprint of the building. So the building will stay as is, as it presently exists. As I mentioned, you do have the garage to the rear of the property, which is accessed by a driveway. Showing the existing second floor and attic plan. So the attic already does exist. There is space in that attic. Any modification of that space would require a review by the Board of Appeal, including the addition of dormers as we're proposing in this case. So in relationship to the previous slide, you can see here that this floor space is being expanded a bit. Again, all within the footprint of the building, but dormered out on the upper level of the attic. And therefore, because that is occurring, that is the area by which we are required to request relief from the Board of Appeal. And looking at the roof deck, we do have the hatch, as I mentioned. There is no head house going up higher than the current roof line that already exists. So we are essentially maintaining the height of the building with the roof deck that's being proposed, and then acts as a very low profile hatch that would not be visible either from the street or from any of the surrounding properties when it was open. So showing our existing elevations, these are the line drawings showing the height of the building, as well as the essentially the exterior layout, the front and rear dormer being shown, and then our proposed dormer conditions that you can see both right and left, front and rear. The front and rear really don't do the justice that it deserves. The renderings are a much better illustration. I can always jump back to those, but I just want people to understand what the relative height change would be compared to what currently exists on the site, with the peak of the roof being here and our roof line being the exact same height. From a zoning standpoint, we make no change with respect to the major items in this property, including no change in the use, and we don't affect them at the lot size, width, front yard, side yard, or rear yard, because we're not, again, changing any portion of the building from its existing footprint. The floor area ratio for this property can be at a maximum of 80%. Because it's a relatively large lot at 6,250 square feet, we're permitted to have about 5,000 square feet of gross floor area, which we will be well under. We're not proposing to increase it over 5,000 square feet, and therefore there is no relief for that either. The quirky technical dimensional regulation that applies in this district is the 2.5-story, 35-foot height limit. I would argue that this still represents a 2.5-story building. If you look at the buildings that surround us, including the ones located directly to our right side, I mean, that is technically a 3-story building. This does have access to a 3rd story, but that's not unlike many of the other buildings along Barnes Ave, which are all considered 2.5 stories. Because we are staying below the 35-foot height limit, that is the more impactful regulation, I think, that needs to be explored here. So we're actually 2 feet 9 inches below what's allowed. However, the design is considered 3-story because of the amount of floor area that we have in that level, and this would otherwise be considered 2.5-story. So we're going to request a variance for that. We think all in all, based upon the reasonableness and the size of this project, it's a very minor variance that's being requested. When you take that in connection with the height itself being below what the actual height limit is, it makes it that much more of a reasonable request to the Board of Appeal. We change nothing with respect to the open space, and the existing parking doesn't change either, and we're not required to address any parking issues simply because we are not changing the occupancy of the building. The roof deck itself is generally a conditional use. It doesn't require a variance anywhere pretty much in the entire East Boston neighborhood. If you do propose to have a head house, you can receive a conditional use permit to obtain that. The Board of Appeals does not prefer head houses, they prefer hatches, which we are complying with. So that roof deck itself, the fact that it is below the 35-foot height limit as well, makes it a conforming roof deck with a conditional use permit. Last but not least is the interim planning overlay district permit, which is applicable to any project in the neighborhood that either alters a roof line, front facade, or adds 1,000 or more square feet. Because we're altering the roof line, we do require an IPRED permit as well. That is simply a process that we will comply with based upon the BPDA's review of this project and the consistency with the planning objectives in the community. We started this process back a few months ago, and we've been working through with ISD as well as the community process. We are aiming to have our voting meeting this January before the Orion Heights Neighbor Council. We will likely go before the zoning board sometime this winter for that relief that we talked about relative to the half-story. If it's approved, the BPDA will have an opportunity to go through the design review And as I said, address some of the comments that I made about the windows as well as the roof deck itself. And the earliest we probably can expect a permit to issue for this is probably spring of 2022. If the construction begins thereafter, we expect that to take about 4 months total to complete. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions, Tony, or address any comments.
Thank you. We did have one question that came in from Donna, just asking why 95 Barnes was not brought up for a vote after its last design review. I provided a link to the notes from the previous meeting. A lot of that, I think, was around the cladding on those dormers and I think the design of the roof deck, whether or not that railing would be see-through or something more solid. Because the dormers, apart from the original one in the front of the house, were, I believe, gray before. So there was quite a bit of pushback around that.
Yeah,
I
and
believe
just
that's correct,
to
Tony.
interject there too, you know, Chelsea and I don't have much of a preference on how it looks, and you know, our preference is probably very much the same with everybody else in terms of you know, we want it to just look nice and fit in with the neighborhood. So apologize that the first go around didn't look that great to some of you, but hopefully the new rendering with carrying the old shingling up to the top looks a little bit better to everybody. But we're open to materials.
Can I jingle in now?
Absolutely, Billy. Let's hear it.
All right. So,
Thanks for joining.
my house is directly behind theirs. And I've been in that house for over 50 years, and they are doing the best thing they could do for that top floor. I've been in there many times, and it's almost unusable as is. So whatever they're doing, proposing, which I see, it's exactly what should be done to that that attic. And I've been friends with the past two owners for many decades, and I met the Dolans, and they're very nice people, and they're trying to do right by the neighborhood, and I can't see, you know, anyone abutting, just improving their home inside and out. And like I said, we can hand a Pepsi over the fence to each other. So I'm in support of what the Dolans are going to do. That's all.
Billy has also been generous enough to actually hand me some of his meatballs and gravy over that fence, so which are very good. Thank you, Billy.
All right, pal.
We're getting a lot of good feedback back in the chat. Larry said it looks great. Mike said much improved. Dennis said good job, Dolans.
Thank you, everyone.
So I'm not sure if there are any additional questions or anything. It sounds like people are very happy with the changes.
I am much in favor of the changes that have been made. I'm still not a fan of the roof deck, but I would not go against it because I'm far enough down the street that it doesn't directly impact me. And if they want it roof deck and no one that is, you know, direct about it to theirs as opposed to it, then far be it for me to complain, because as I say, I'm not close enough to be affected by it.
Very
But-
good.
Yeah, no, but it looks great compared to the last rendering.
Thank you.
Right, if folks don't have any additional comments, I will pause for a second just in case anybody chimes in. But it's, oh, Joanne said, thank you for taking the previous suggestions into account. It makes all the difference. Good luck.
Thank you.
But from the sounds of it, we should be able to schedule you for the January 18th meeting for a vote. That is a Tuesday because Martin Luther King Jr. Day is a Monday.
That'd be appreciated. Thank you, Tony. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, we'll get that scheduled, and I suppose that will be it for our meeting tonight.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks,
I'll
everyone.
send out the recap in a bit.
Thank you.
Everybody take care. Bye.